Zima by Wendy Coriel and Google, read by Atlas. We are living in the era of the visible invisible. We see the lawsuits in Menominee, the microphones in Green Bay, and the satellites in the sky. Yet we are told they are disconnected events, random ripples in a chaotic world. This book is the evidence that there is no such thing as a random ripple. By March 2026, the internal invasion has moved from a theory to a daily reality. This work is a field manual for those who have begun to notice that their local council has been neutered, their currency has been tokenized, and their geography has been choke-pointed. It is a chronicle of the inside job, the process by which the United States is being reorganized into a series of managed zones that mimic the closed system efficiency of North Korea, but with the high-bandwidth gloss of a corporate tech state. The chapters that follow trace the cannibalism of capitalism as it eats the very towns that built it. From the $20 million legal traps in Michigan to the $1 million voter bribes in Wisconsin, the message is singular. The social contract has been rewritten. The new signatories are not we the people, but a nationalist tech elite, and the state-appointed managers who carry their clipboards. But this is also a book of the Great Recoil. As we explore the internal 38th parallel being drawn between neighbors, we also find the seeds of the analog city. Just as the Amish once chose the horse and buggy over the grid, a new generation of Americans is choosing the manual life over the managed life. They are retreating to the woods of the Upper Peninsula and the valleys of Wisconsin to build sovereign enclaves that are air-gapped from the orbital kill webs and the Ripple CBDC. If you feel the pencil line being drawn around your home, if you see the zima of a geopolitical winter approaching, or if you simply wonder why your local mayor is bracing for bankruptcy, this book is for you. It is a map of the trap and a guide to the only exit left, the Great Unlinking. The managed city is in its twilight. What follows is the dawn of the analog soul. Chapter 1. The Menominee Blueprint. Bankruptcy as a Weapon. The anatomy of a trigger event. In the strategy of modern territorial displacement, an invasion does not begin with a crossing of borders. It begins with a trigger event. For Menominee, Michigan, that event was not a natural disaster or a physical strike, but a meticulously leveraged legal crisis. The mechanism is simple yet devastating. Litigation-induced bankruptcy. By early 2026, Menominee became the primary case study for this tactic. The city, a small community of roughly 8,000 people, found itself caught in a pincer maneuver between competing corporate interests and internal administrative paralysis. At the center of the storm is a lawsuit filed by Puff Cannabis, a business that claims it did everything by the book, securing building permits, investing nearly $1 million in construction, and even moving employees from the Lower Peninsula, only to be denied a final certificate of occupancy over parking lot technicalities. The math of the collapse. To understand the why behind the strategy, you have to look at the math. Puff Cannabis is seeking at least $20 million in compensatory damages. For a city like Menominee, that figure isn't just a large number. It is a death blow. The damage is calculated by a loss of opportunity metric. Puff's legal team argues the store would have generated $3 million to $4 million in monthly revenue. Because the city has blocked them from opening since July 2025, the damage clock is ticking at an estimated $100,000 per day. By the time the court proceedings reach their peak in March 2026, the potential liability had already surpassed the city's entire annual operating budget. This is the moment of administrative fragility. The mayor, Casey Hoffman, publicly voiced a terrifying reality. Half of his council wanted to settle to save the city, while the other half wanted to fight a battle they were predicted to lose. This internal division is the neutron bomb of local government. It leaves the buildings standing, but destroys the ability to govern. The transition to state rule, Public Act 436. When a city bets the farm in court and loses, the state of Michigan does not simply offer a bailout. It invokes Public Act 436, the Local Financial Stability and Choice Act. This is the neutering process in its most literal form. Once a financial emergency is declared, the governor, currently Gretchen Whitmer, has the power to appoint an emergency manager. This individual is not an elected official. They do not answer to the residents of Menominee. Instead, they act as a receiver with absolute authority. Under the law, the emergency manager can dissolve the powers of the mayor and council. They are relegated to advisory roles or removed entirely. Terminate contracts. All collective bargaining agreements with city workers can be torn up. Liquidate assets. The city's parks, utilities, and public lands can be sold to satisfy corporate creditors like Puff Cannabis. Suspend democracy. Local elections become a formality, as the manager holds the ultimate veto over every penny spent. The corporate interveners. The strategy is deepened by the involvement of interveners, companies like Highwire Farms and groups like Defending Menominee, which Puff's lawyers allege is a front for existing competitors like Loom Cannabis, have joined the legal fray. While the businesses fight over who gets the final 9th license allowed by the city's voter-approved cap, the city itself is bled dry by the legal fees and the mounting daily damages. In January 2026, Judge Mary Bargland ordered all parties into mediation, but the damage was already done. The city had become a territory in litigation, where the laws are written by judges and corporate attorneys, rather than the people of Menominee. The strategic objective. Why target a small town like Menominee? Because it is the gateway to the UP. By triggering a bankruptcy here, the state creates a managed zone at the literal border of Wisconsin. If the city is under a state-appointed manager, the most vital land route for supplies, energy, and commerce into the Upper Peninsula is no longer controlled by Ukers, but by a centralized office in Lansing that is deeply integrated with regional and global economic agendas. Menominee is not just a town losing a lawsuit. It is a sovereign municipality being converted into a corporate state subsidiary. Summary. The lawsuit. Puff Cannabis is suing for over $20 million, claiming $100,000 in lost profit damages every single day. The mayor's warning. Mayor Hoffman has signaled the city is betting the farm and will likely lose. The legal trap. Competing businesses Highwire and Loom are intervening, prolonging the case and draining the city's remaining cash. The outcome. Bankruptcy triggers Public Act 436, allowing Governor Whitmer to appoint a city manager with total power over local assets and laws. The choke point. Controlling Menominee through debt allows the state to control the primary land gate between Michigan and Wisconsin. Chapter 2. The Green Bay Model, the Surveillance Trap. The Interior Front. While Menominee is being dismantled from the outside by corporate litigation, Green Bay, Wisconsin represents a more insidious form of territorial compromise. The erosion of the civic interior. In a traditional invasion, an adversary seeks to control the streets. In a modern internal invasion, the goal is to control the conversations within the halls of power. By early 2026, Green Bay became the national case study for how a local government can be hollowed out by its own security apparatus. The strategy is built on a simple premise. If you can record the private interactions of elected officials, whistleblowers, and citizens, you can effectively neuter any opposition before it reaches the public floor. The microphone scandal, a breach of the social contract. The crisis began in late 2022, but reached a legal fever pitch in 2024 and 2025. Under the administration of Mayor Eric Genrich, the city installed high-powered audio recording devices in the hallways of City Hall. These were not standard security cameras. They were sensitive microphones capable of capturing whispers from several yards away. The justification offered by the administration was safety and security. a common refrain used by centralized authorities to bypass privacy laws. However, the legal reality was far darker. In June 2024, the city was forced to settle a landmark lawsuit with former Alderman Tony Thiessen for $100,000. Thiessen proved that the city had willfully intercepted oral communications in a place where individuals had a reasonable expectation of privacy. This settlement was the first breach. It proved that the city government had moved beyond public service and into active intelligence gathering against its own people. The wary precedent, scaling the litigation. As of March 2026, the situation has escalated from a single scandal into a systemic financial drain. Former Alderman Chris Wary filed a new comprehensive lawsuit that targets the very heart of the city's legal defense. Wary's suit alleges that the surveillance was not an accidental overreach, but a coordinated effort to monitor political rivals. The strategy of the surveillance trap works in 3 stages. The installation. Surveillance is implemented under a safety mandate, often linked to state or federal grants. The discovery. A whistleblower or official discovers the breach, leading to a privacy lawsuit. The depletion. The city is forced to pay millions in settlements and legal fees. In Green Bay's case, the city has already spent over $300,000 just in preliminary legal defenses and minor settlements. By the time the Wary case concludes, the city's insurance premiums will skyrocket, and its general fund will be depleted. Like Menominee, Green Bay is being sued into a corner, where the only escape is a state-funded bailout that comes with the price of local sovereignty. The psychological occupation. Beyond the money, there is the psychological occupation. When a city hall is bugged, the internal invasion is successful because it kills the democratic process. Constituent silence. Citizens stop coming to their representatives with problems because they fear being recorded by the state. Attorney-client privilege. The Wary lawsuit specifically notes that conversations between city officials and their lawyers were likely intercepted, compromising the city's ability to even defend itself in court. The neutered council. Much like the state-appointed manager in Michigan, the Green Bay City Council has become a house divided. Pro-surveillance factions clash with civil liberties factions, leading to legislative gridlock. The international overlay, the WHO and smart governance. There is a direct line between these local microphones and the global push for smart cities. Under frameworks promoted by organizations like the World Health Organization, WHO, and the World Economic Forum, WEF, integrated data environments are viewed as the gold standard for urban management. In this model, privacy is seen as an inefficiency. The surveillance in Green Bay is simply a localized version of the social credit system. By monitoring who talks to whom in the halls of power, the managed state can identify dissenters and adjust their access to political or financial resources. The goal, the controlled collapse. The Green Bay model shows us that you don't need to arrest people to stop them. You only need to make the cost of being private too high for the city to afford. As 2026 progresses, the mounting settlements in Green Bay are pushing the city toward a structural deficit. When the city can no longer afford to pay its police, fire, or legal settlements due to the surveillance drain, the state of Wisconsin, much like Michigan, will have the legal justification to step in, neuter the council, and install an administrator who will ensure the microphones stay on and the data keeps flowing to the centralized hubs in Madison and beyond. Summary. The scandal. Secret microphones in Green Bay City Hall used to record private conversations of citizens and officials. The first payout. Tony Thiessen's $100,000 victory proved the city violated the Fourth Amendment. The 2026 escalation. Chris Wary's new lawsuit threatens to turn the surveillance drain into a multi-million-dollar bankruptcy event. The social cost. Total breakdown of trust between the people and their local representatives. The takeover link. Financial exhaustion from privacy lawsuits provides the state with the excuse to seize control of the city's administration. Chapter 3: High Ground Hegemony, the Orbital Front, and the Michigan Connection. The invisible ceiling. In the traditional understanding of a siege, the defenders look to the horizon for an approaching army. In 2026, the horizon has been superseded by the vertical. The high ground is no longer a hill or a mountain. It is low Earth orbit. To understand why a town like Menominee or a region like the Upper Peninsula is a target, one must look at the invisible ceiling of satellite infrastructure that governs every second of modern life. By March 2026, the theater of space has transitioned from exploration to active counter-space operations. The primary driver of this shift is the realization that the United States' greatest strength, its hyperconnectivity, is also its most profound vulnerability. The Chinese kill web and grappler technology. The most significant threat to the Midwest security does not come from the ground, but from the grappler satellites now being deployed by the People's Republic of China. As warned by U.S. Space Command, these are highly maneuverable, dual-use assets. The strategy is kinetic displacement. Robotic arms. These satellites are equipped with mechanical appendages designed to physically seize U.S. GPS and communication satellites. They do not need to blow them up. They simply grab them and pull them out of their stable orbits, dragging them into the atmosphere to burn up. The GPS blackout. For a region like the UP, which relies on satellite data for everything from emergency services to the navigation of iron ore freighters in the Straits of Mackinac, a targeted GPS dazzling or blackout is a silent act of war. It effectively blinds the local population while the adversary maintains a 24-hour orbital eye. The social credit link. This orbital surveillance is the eye in the sky for the global social credit system. By integrating satellite thermal imaging with high-altitude drones, the state can monitor the movement of individuals in real time, even in the dense forests of northern Michigan. The orbital threat is mirrored by a Trojan horse strategy on the ground. The most prominent example in Michigan is the Goshen Inc. battery plant near Big Rapids. While framed by the Whitmer administration as a green energy win, the project represents a massive strategic inroad for foreign-controlled interests. The invasion by infrastructure works as follows. Land acquisition. Large swaths of land are purchased near critical energy and transport hubs. Data proximity. These plants are located near high-voltage power lines and fiber optic backbones. This allows for passive interception of domestic data. Economic dependency. Once a small town becomes dependent on a foreign-linked megafactory for jobs, the local government is effectively captured. The council cannot vote against the interests of the plant without risking total economic collapse. In 2026, the Goshen project is no longer just a factory. It is a node. If a conflict breaks out, these nodes can serve as localized dark sites for electronic warfare, capable of jamming regional communications or sabotaging the very power grid they are plugged into. The space-to-ground pincer. The ultimate goal of high-ground hegemony is the pincer maneuver. From above, satellite grapplers and jammers disable the U.S. military's ability to coordinate a response or monitor the border. From below, foreign-controlled infrastructure hubs, like the Goshen plant, and state-appointed emergency managers, like the one looming over Menominee, control the physical movement of goods and energy. This is why the neutering of local councils is so vital to the global strategy. A local council might ask questions about the security risks of a foreign battery plant, or the surveillance capabilities of a new satellite link. A state-appointed city manager, however, follows the directive. They prioritize efficiency and global integration over local security. The result? The managed territory. By the time the population realizes they are under a new form of high-ground rule, the transition is already complete. The Mackinac Bridge is monitored by orbital thermal sensors. The city budget is managed by a state-appointed receiver, and the local factory is a subsidiary of a foreign power. The UP becomes a managed territory, a high-resource zone where the people are allowed to stay, but the sovereignty has been moved to the clouds and the corporate boardrooms in Lansing and Beijing. Summary: space warfare. China's grappler satellites can physically remove US GPS assets, blinding the Midwest. The Goshen threat. Foreign-linked infrastructure in Michigan serves as a Trojan horse for data harvesting and grid sabotage. The pincer, combining orbital dominance with ground-level emergency management to bypass local elections. The GPS blackout, how a targeted strike on satellites would paralyze the UP's shipping and emergency services. Thermal surveillance, the use of satellite imaging to monitor civilian movement in real time, integrating local towns into a global social credit web. Chapter 4. Invasion by Division, the internal 38th parallel, the architecture of the pencil line. To understand how a sovereign nation is dismantled from within, one must study the history of the 38th parallel. In 1945, at the end of World War II, two American colonels with no specialized knowledge of Korea sat in a room with a National Geographic map. They drew a line across the center of the peninsula, dividing it into Soviet and American zones. This pencil line was intended to be a temporary administrative boundary. Instead, it became a permanent, blood-soaked scar that created two entirely different realities for a single people. In 2026, we are witnessing the construction of the internal 38th parallel across the American Midwest. This new line is not made of barbed wire or concrete, at least not yet. It is a line of ideological and legal jurisdictions drawn by the referees of our society, the judiciary. The referees of the conflict. The strategy of invasion by division relies on capturing the courts. If you control the judges, you control the rules of engagement for every town and city. Look at the 2025 and 2026 judicial races in Wisconsin. These were not mere local elections. They were the most expensive Supreme Court contests in human history, fueled by tens of millions of dollars from tech billionaires like Elon Musk and national ideological PACs. The objective is judicial balkanization, the redistricting war. By installing specific mapmakers on the bench, the internal invasion ensures that certain voting blocks are permanently neutralized while others are amplified. The preemption doctrine. We see a growing trend where state courts neuter local ordinances. If a city like Menominee tries to pass a local safety law or a tax on corporate entities, a captured state court can strike it down instantly, moving the power from the town square to the state capitol. The bankruptcy gating. Judges now decide which cities are allowed to file for bankruptcy and which are forced into state-appointed receivership. This is the legal trapdoor that allows a governor to bypass the local UPR vote and install a city manager who answers to a centralized agenda. The friction border. Menominee versus Marinette. The most dangerous manifestation of the internal 38th parallel is the friction border between neighboring towns. Menominee, Michigan, and Marinette, Wisconsin are twin cities separated only by a bridge. For over a century, they have operated as a single economic organism. However, in 2026, the pencil line is being sharpened. Regulatory divergence. As Michigan moves towards state-managed emergency rule in Menominee due to the cannabis lawsuits, and Wisconsin maintains a different judicial framework in Marinette, the bridge becomes a filter. The filtering of commerce. When the laws of two neighboring towns become fundamentally incompatible. On everything from labor rights to surveillance, trade begins to stutter. The identity split. Much like North and South Korea, the population begins to identify more with their administrative zone than their shared heritage. This resentment loop is manufactured to ensure that the two sides never unite against the centralized authorities in Lansing or Madison. The WHO and the global safety overlay. This internal division is being overseen by an international layer of smart governance. In early 2026, despite national political shifts, organizations like the World Health Organization, WHO, and the United Nations continue to promote global health security frameworks that require cities to be integrated data nodes. Under these mandates, local autonomy is reframed as a security risk. If a city council refuses to implement a centralized tracking system or a digital ID for cross-border travel, like the Menominee Bridge, the state uses the financial emergency as a pretext to step in. The internal invasion is finalized when the state-appointed manager justifies their rule by claiming they are simply bringing the city into compliance with international standards. The North Korea Event Horizon. The final stage of the internal 38th parallel is the frozen conflict. This happens when the division becomes so institutionalized that the local population can no longer imagine a unified future. In the North Michigan, a landscape of managed zones where cities are run by receivers and the local council is a vestigial organ. In the South, Wisconsin, a landscape of private jurisdictions where billionaires and corporate entities own the infrastructure and the law is a service sold to the highest bidder. The invasion is successful because the people are too busy looking across the bridge at their rivals to see the pencil line being traced around their own homes. By 2026, the line is no longer just on a map. It is in the city budget, the court records, and the digital IDs at the border. Summary: the pencil line. How arbitrary divisions like the 38th parallel become permanent walls. Judicial capture. The use of massive private funding to pick the referees who decide local laws. Friction borders, turning the Menominee Bridge into a filter for commerce and identity. The smart mandate, using WHO and international standards to justify the neutering of local councils. Frozen conflict, the creation of administrative zones where the local vote no longer exists. Chapter 5, the choke point strategy, the final isolation. The geography of vulnerability. If the goal of the internal invasion is to neuter the Upper Peninsula, the physical geography of the region does most of the work. The UP is a high-resource territory with the soul of an island. It is connected to the rest of the world by a series of precarious arteries that in 2026 are being systematically compromised. The choke point strategy is the final phase of control. It relies on the reality that you do not need to occupy a territory if you can successfully gasket its exits. By controlling 3 specific points, the Mackinac Bridge, Line 5, and the Wisconsin Gateway, the managed state can effectively isolate the UP from the rest of the world within minutes. The Mackinac Bridge, the fragile umbilical. The Mackinac Bridge is the ultimate single point of failure. In March 2026, the bridge's vulnerability was on full display. As of March 20th, 2026, the bridge was closed to all traffic due to hazardous falling ice. This is not just a weather event, it is a proof of concept for a kinetic denial of service. The ice closure precedent: when the mighty Mac closes, the UP is instantly severed from the lower peninsula. In 2026, traffic and toll revenues are already down, reflecting a growing logistics anxiety. The cyber trigger. As we discussed with high ground hegemony, an adversary doesn't need to bomb the bridge. They only need to manipulate the SCADA systems that monitor the falling ice sensors or the structural wind dampeners. By feeding false danger data to the Mackinac Bridge Authority, a state or corporate actor can force a precautionary long-term closure, effectively turning the UP into a peninsula of Wisconsin by force of safety mandates. The second choke point is invisible: Enbridge's Line 5. This pipeline transports the propane and light crude oil that heats the homes of the Upper Peninsula. In March 2026, a critical update sent shockwaves through the region. The project to house Line 5 in a protective tunnel beneath the lakebed has been delayed until at least 2031. This means that for the next 5 years, the energy lifeline of the UP remains exposed on the lakebed of the Straits. The anchor strike threat. despite Enbridge's Maritime Operations Center recently recording its 10,000th vessel observation to prevent strikes, the dual pipelines remain a soft target. The planned crisis. If a conflict or emergency were declared, the state could order the decommissioning of the line before the tunnel is ready, citing environmental safety. Without Line 5, the UP would face an immediate energy collapse in the dead of winter, forcing the population to accept any state-managed solution just to stay warm. The Sault Ste. Marie lockdown. The northern exit is the Sault Ste. Marie International Bridge and the Sault Locks. On March 25, 2026, the Po Lock is scheduled to open for the shipping season, but the security profile has changed. The Sault Ste. Marie Bridge Authority 2026 to 2030 Asset Management Plan reveals a massive push for advanced security systems, including automated camera systems and motion-detecting sensors. While framed as protection, this creates a hard border between the U.S. and Canada. If the Mackinac Bridge is closed and the Wisconsin border is strained, the international bridge becomes a bottleneck where every person and vehicle is subject to a security search by state-appointed officials, effectively ending the era of free movement. Menominee, the border valve. Finally, we return to the ground. Menominee, Michigan is the valve for the Wisconsin gateway. The financial stress score. In 2026, the Michigan Economic Vitality Index has flagged at-risk counties as seeing the highest increases in unemployment. Menominee's cost of living is rising, while its tax base is being hollowed out by the cannabis lawsuits. The takeover logic. If Menominee goes bankrupt, the state of Michigan installs an emergency manager. This manager then controls the valve. They can implement tolls, safety checks, or regulatory hurdles at the Menominee Marinette Bridge that prioritize state-level efficiency over local commerce. The conclusion. The gasket is closed. The choke point strategy is now complete. Mackinac is closed for safety, ice, or cyber. Line 5 is threatened with environmental shutdown. Menominee is under an emergency manager. The Upper Peninsula is no longer a part of a free state. It is a contained environment. The people are still there. The forests are still there. But the sovereignty has been gasketed off. This is the final stage of the internal invasion. You don't need to take the land if you can control the air, the energy, and the exits. Summary. Mackinac Bridge. Vulnerable to safety closures that can be triggered by weather or cyber manipulation. Line 5 delay. The tunnel project is pushed to 2031, leaving the UP's energy source exposed and subject to emergency decommissioning. Sault Locks. The 2026 season opens with high-intensity automated surveillance and security checkpoints. Menominee Valve. Economic stress and lawsuits are being used to install a state-appointed border manager. The result? The UP becomes a geographically isolated, managed zone, where movement and energy are controlled by Lansing. This chapter takes us back across the bridge to Green Bay, where the high-stakes world of billionaire influence, election litigation, and the surveillance trap collide. Chapter 6, The Billionaire's Cheesehead, Green Bay's High-Stakes Hijack. The $100 million battlefield. If the Upper Peninsula is the managed zone, Green Bay is the high-frequency trading floor of American politics. By March 2026, the city has become the focal point of a national experiment. How much money does it take to overwrite a local election? The benchmark was set in early 2025 during the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, the most expensive judicial contest in history. While the local budget was bleeding from privacy lawsuits, external capital flooded the city. At the center of this was Elon Musk, who appeared at a high-profile rally in Green Bay wearing a green and gold cheesehead hat. This wasn't just theater. It was the arrival of a new kind of voter-centric influence. The voter bribe and the $1 million check. During the 2025-2026 cycle, the term election bribery moved from the history books to the nightly news. Musk's America PAC introduced a controversial tactic: offering $1 million checks to registered voters in swing states who signed a petition supporting the First and Second Amendments. In Green Bay, this created a legal firestorm. The mechanism? Critics labeled it a bribe, designed to bypass campaign finance laws. The strategy? By offering life-changing sums to individual citizens, the billionaire class creates a direct loyalty loop that bypasses the Republican and Democratic parties alike. The GOP hub, with Wisconsin serving as the HQ for the GOP's 2026 ground game, Green Bay became the testing site for this direct-to-voter financing, effectively turning citizens into stakeholders in a corporate political merger. The Facebook connection, Michael Spitzer Rubenstein. To understand the GOP resistance in Green Bay, you have to look at the Zuckerbucks scandal that preceded it. The internal invasion of Green Bay's election machinery began in 2020 with the arrival of Michael Spitzer Rubenstein, a Democratic operative linked to the Center for Tech and Civic Life, funded by Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg. As documented in legislative hearings, Spitzer Rubenstein was given unprecedented access to the city's election process, including the central count at the KI Convention Center. Republican investigators, led by former Justice Michael Gableman, alleged that he was essentially running the show from a hotel room. This is the Chris Teskey Facebook nexus, where a city outsources its democratic functions to third-party executives in exchange for millions in election grants. This created the original sin of distrust that would later justify the city's secret surveillance program. The Wary paradox, helping the takeover. Enter Chris Wary, the former alderman whose 2026 lawsuit is now hitting the city with the force of a wrecking ball. Wary, a staunch conservative, is suing the city for the secret microphones installed in City Hall. He views himself as a defender of the Fourth Amendment, and he is right. However, there is a strategic paradox at play. The intent? Wary wants to hold Mayor Genrich accountable for the surveillance scandal. The reality? By winning massive settlements following the $100,000 Tony Thiessen precedent, Wary is unintentionally accelerating the financial collapse of Green Bay. The trap. Every dollar Green Bay pays to Wary is a dollar taken away from police, fire, and infrastructure. Once the city hits the financial red zone, it provides the Republican-controlled state legislature and the governor with the exact excuse they need to declare a financial emergency. The ultimate outcome, the corporate-state merger. The Green Bay model shows us that it doesn't matter which side wins the lawsuit. The city loses. If the liberals win, the city keeps the smart city surveillance microphones and the Zuckerbucks-style administrative grants. If the conservatives win, the city is bankrupted by lawsuits like Wary's, leading to a state-appointed receiver who answers to the billionaire-funded GOP. In both scenarios, the local council is neutered. The power shifts from the people of Brown County to the people who can afford the $1 million checks and the $100 million judicial campaigns. Green Bay is no longer a city. It is a corporate-controlled asset. It is a vested asset in a high-stakes game of territorial and digital capture. Summary: the Cheesehead Rally. Elon Musk's $100 million entry into Wisconsin politics as the Silicon Valley of strategy. The voter prize, 1 million checks used as a legal loophole to secure voter turnout in the 2026 cycle. Zuckerbucks 2.0, the history of Michael Spitzer Rubenstein, and the outsourcing of Green Bay elections to tech executives. The Wary lawsuit, how a privacy victory is actually the final financial blow that triggers state receivership. The GOP hub, why Green Bay is the strategic HQ for an internal invasion of the Midwest. Chapter 7. The managed collapse, digital chains, and the neural front. The inside job, the architecture of isolation. To understand the fall of the American experiment in 2026, one must stop looking for an external invader. The North Korea model does not require a foreign army. It requires an inside job that turns the nation's own tools of prosperity into a digital cage. While the public was distracted by the pencil line of internal politics, the foundation of the US dollar was being systematically dismantled. With the return of the America First agenda, the United States has moved toward a state of strategic loneliness. By March 2026, global sentiment has curdled. After the U.S. military intervention in Venezuela and the capture of its leadership, even long-standing allies have begun to distance themselves. As a result, the world is diplomatically closer to Beijing than at any point this century. When the managed collapse hits, the reality is stark. No one is coming to help. The financial kill switch, tokenization, and Ripple XRP, the transition from a free market to a managed economy, is powered by the tokenization of everything. In 2026, the movement toward a central bank digital currency, CBDC, has accelerated, utilizing the Ripple XRP ledger as the programmable backbone for the new financial order. This is not just digital money. Under this system, programmable spending, your tokens can be programmed with an expiration date or restricted to specific approved vendors. If you are a resident of a bankrupt city like Menominee, your state-issued tokens might only work within city limits. Instant seizure. Because every transaction is tokenized and tracked via AI-driven compliance software, the state can freeze the assets of dissenters like Chris Wary or any intervener with the push of a button. The AI Auditor. Real-time AI surveillance embedded into the Ripple network flags anomalous behavior, such as stockpiling supplies or donating to unapproved local causes, before the transaction even clears. The Musk-Trump nexus. Destabilization for control. The financial destabilization is not an accident. It is a feature of the partnership between Donald Trump and Elon Musk. While Trump uses global tariffs averaging 17% by early 2026 to shock the retail economy, Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, has implemented a scorched earth policy on federal agencies. The result is fiscal chaos. The dollars dive. As investors lose confidence in Washington's fiscal discipline, the dollar has ceased to be a safe haven. The debt trigger. With $15 trillion projected to be added to the national debt, the interest payments alone have become a national security crisis, providing the perfect excuse for the state to emergency manage the entire country. Much like the process used for Menominee. The neural front, Starlink and Neuralink. If the CBDC is the digital chain, then Starlink and Neuralink are the walls of the prison. Elon Musk's satellite constellation, Starlink, now controls the backbone of information. For the Upper Peninsula, Starlink isn't just an ISP, it is the only gate. By controlling the satellites, Musk holds a sovereign switch over every communication in the region. But the final frontier is the mind. Neuralink, which saw its first human trials expand in late 2025, represents the ultimate inside job. The social credit interface. In a North Korea scenario, you don't need a secret police if the state is plugged directly into the citizen's sensory input. By 2026, the goal is biometric sovereignty. The predicted descent. AI algorithms fed by Starlink's data and eventually Neuralink's biometric feedback can predict civil unrest before it happens. This allows for preemptive containment, shutting down the bank accounts and internet access of individuals before they can even organize a protest in Green Bay or Menominee. The result? The self-correcting cage. The tragedy of the 2026 takeover is that it was sold as efficiency. By the time the inside job is finished, the US looks like North Korea, but with better branding. The world has turned its back. The dollar is a tokenized memory, and the referees of the law have been replaced by the algorithms of the state. The population isn't being held by barbed wire. They are being held by a 10% cap on credit card interest and the fear that if they speak out, their digital wallet will simply vanish into the ether of the Ripple network. Summary: strategic loneliness. Why the 2026 world order has abandoned America to its own internal collapse. Tokenized control. How CBDCs on the Ripple network turn money into a conditional asset. The tariff shock. Trump and Musk's strategy to use economic chaos as a justification for emergency management. The sovereign switch. Elon Musk's control over Starlink as the global gatekeeper of information. Biometric sovereignty. The role of Neuralink and AI in predicting and neutralizing dissent before it begins. Chapter 8. The Statute of Silence. Sleepers, Spies, and the Russian Winter. The Legal Gasket. Wisconsin Statute Chapter 252. While the financial chains of CBDCs and tokenization form the digital walls of the new managed zone, the physical cage is built on the fine print of state law. In Wisconsin, the ultimate kill switch for civil liberty is Chapter 252. This statute, governing communicable diseases, grants the Department of Health Services and local health officers nearly unlimited power during a declared emergency. Under Chapter 252, the state has the legal authority to mandatory quarantine, lock individuals in their homes or state-designated facilities without a traditional trial, property seizure, commandeer private property for emergency use, forced medical interventions, direct the actions of every citizen under the guise of public safety. The North Korea model requires a legal justification for the suspension of the person. Chapter 252 is that justification. It is the legal gasket that allows a governor to bypass the legislature and the courts, turning a health emergency into a permanent state of administrative lockdown. The Taiwan-Michigan paradox, a training ground for conflict. The global conflict between China and Taiwan is no longer confined to the South China Sea. It has a domestic front in Michigan. In a stunning display of conflicting interests, Michigan has become a training ground for the Taiwanese army. Under the State Partnership Program, Taiwanese troops have been documented training at Camp Grayling in northern Michigan. This creates a volatile pincer within the state. The Taiwanese presence, a Democratic ally training for urban warfare on Michigan soil. The Chinese inroad. The Goshen Battery Plant, a multi-billion dollar entity with direct ties to the CCP, situated just a few hours away. Michigan is not just a state. It is a proxy battlefield where the two Chinas are competing for infrastructure, land, and influence right in the backyard of the Upper Peninsula. The sleeper cells, the Iranian mask. The strategy of the inside job utilizes misdirection. While the media warns of Iranian sleeper cells, strategic analysts suggest a deeper layer of cooperative espionage. Iran, China, and Russia have formed a triple axis of intelligence sharing. The Iranian threat may in fact be a mask for Chinese communist operatives embedded within the U.S. infrastructure. This is the modern evolution of Eli Cohen, the world-famous Israeli spy who successfully infiltrated the highest levels of the Syrian government by posing as a wealthy businessman. The modern Eli Cohen. These operatives do not wear uniforms. They are executives at tech firms, consultants for city managers, or logistics experts at the Sault Ste. Marie border. Their goal is structural sabotage, waiting for the signal to trigger the choke point strategy discussed in Chapter 5. The Russian Winter, the legend of Guy Zima. All roads in the Midwest front eventually lead back to the border between Menominee and Green Bay, and the strange synchronicity of Guy Zima. Born in Menominee and rising to become a political powerhouse in Green Bay, Zima's very name carries a haunting weight. In Russian, Zima literally means winter. The Zima strategy. Just as General Winter defeated Napoleon and Hitler, the modern Russian winter is a strategy of freezing a population through energy dependency and political gridlock. The Menominee link. Zima's history connects the bankruptcy of Menominee, with the surveillance scandals of Green Bay. He represents the old guard being swept away by the new managers. The triple axis, with Iran, China, and Russia working in tandem, the Russian winter is no longer just a season. It is a geopolitical mandate to freeze the American Midwest in a state of perpetual financial emergency. The result? The managed colony. When you combine the lockdown laws of Chapter 252 with the sleeper cells embedded in our infrastructure, the picture of the inside job becomes clear. The U.S. is being prepared for a managed transition. North Korea shows us how a country stays locked when the world is shut out. China shows us how to use smart city tech to ensure no one escapes. Zima's winter shows us that the people who understand the machinery of the Midwest have already been sidelined. It is in the statutes, it is in the battery plants, and it is in the names of the men who built the very bridges that are now being used as choke points. Summary. Chapter 252. The Wisconsin law that provides the legal gasket for mandatory lockdowns and property seizure. The Michigan proxy. Why the Taiwanese army and Chinese-linked Goshen are competing for dominance in a single state. The Eli Cohen model. How sleeper operatives use business and tech roles to mask their ties to the China-Russia-Iran axis. The Zima connection. How the Russian word for winter ties a Menominee-born politician to the freezing of local sovereignty. The 38th parallel of the mind. Using health emergencies to transition the Midwest into a North Korea-style managed zone. This final chapter examines the endgame for local governance, where the green rush of cannabis meets the cold reality of data-driven nationalism. It is a narrative of how the cannibalism of capitalism leads directly to a new form of state-managed socialism. Chapter 9. The Data Sovereign, Cannabis, Cannibalism, and the New National Tech. The Great Cannabis Consolidation. In the early days of legalization, the green rush was sold as a win for local autonomy and small business capitalism. In Menominee, it was supposed to be the lifeblood that paved the streets and funded the schools. But by 2026, the mask has slipped. As we have seen with the $20 million lawsuits and the neutering of the city council, the state does not want 1,000 small flowers to bloom. It wants a state-managed monopoly. The trajectory is clear. The legal culling use massive litigation to bankrupt small cities. The receivership use Public Act 436 to install an emergency manager. The nationalization. Once the state controls the city, it controls the licenses. We are moving toward cannabis co-op socialism. In this model, the stores are no longer private entities. They are state-sanctioned dispensaries where the surplus profit goes directly to the state's central fund. It is a cooperative in name only, a system where the state is the only wholesaler, the only regulator, and eventually, the only owner. The cannibalism of capitalism. Menominee is the smoking gun for why capitalism is cannibalizing itself. In a healthy capitalist system, businesses compete to serve the customer. In the end-stage model seen in the UP, businesses like Puff Cannabis and Highwire Farms are forced to sue the very municipalities they inhabit just to survive. Capitalism becomes cannibalistic when the legal cost of doing business exceeds the value of the service. When a company has to destroy a city's budget to secure a license, it isn't building an economy. It is eating the foundation it stands on. The result is a hollowed-out city that has no choice but to surrender to the governor. This is the inside job of the market. It creates a crisis that only a nationalist tech leader can claim to solve. The data center, the final fortress. For a city like Menominee, there is only one Hail Mary left for independence: the data center. In 2026, data is more valuable than lithium, oil, or weed. If Menominee can pivot from being a cannabis hub to a sovereign data hub, it might create enough digital gravity to repel a state takeover. The power play. Data centers require massive, consistent electricity, something the UP has in abundance if it can bypass the Line 5 choke points. The AI host. By hosting the nationalist AI, the localized LLMs used for surveillance and social credit, a city becomes too big to fail. The independence trap. However, this independence is an illusion. To run a data center, you must plug into the Starlink backbone and the Ripple CBDC network. You trade the state manager for the tech architect. The nationalist tech leader. No escape. As the U.S. continues its managed collapse, the transition to a nationalist tech state becomes inevitable. There is no escape to the woods when the woods are monitored by thermal satellites and the local economy is tokenized. The new American reality is powered by two things: weeds and watts. The weed keeps the population managed, sedentary, and contributing to the state co-op revenue. The watts power the data centers that run the AI, the CBDC, and the Neuralink interfaces. This is the new America. It is a country where independence means you have a high-speed connection and a state-approved digital wallet. The inside job was convincing the public that they were fighting for freedom while they were actually building the infrastructure for their own digital 38th parallel. Conclusion. The closed loop. The internal invasion of Michigan and Wisconsin ends not with a bang, but with a sign-in screen. Menominee, the gate to the UP, becomes a node in a vast nationalist network. The council is gone. The lawsuits are settled by state decree, and the only capitalism left is the one managed by the tech leader at the top. The North Korea of the Midwest isn't a starving wasteland. It's a neon-lit, weed-scented, high-bandwidth cage where the door is locked from the inside, and the key is a 12-digit recovery phrase held by the state. Summary. Cannabis nationalization. How state receivership turns local pot shops into state-run cooperatives. Capitalist cannibalism. Why businesses in Menominee are forced to destroy the city to win the market. The data center gambit. Why Menominee's only hope is becoming a digital fortress for the new AI regime. The Watts and Weed economy, the two pillars of the 2026 Nationalist Tech State. The final lock. Why independence in the new America is just a managed participation in the digital state. Afterward. The Great Recoil, the rise of the analog city, the prophecy of the prism. The digital age was promised as a window. It has become a prism that refracts our reality until the truth is unrecognizable. We have traced the blueprint of the internal invasion, from the bankrupt streets of Menominee to the bugged hallways of Green Bay. We have seen the inside job of the tokenized dollar and the orbital kill web. But in every system of total control, there is a great recoil. As the nationalist tech state solidifies its grip, a new faith is emerging. It is the Church of the Analog, and its gospel is the high-fidelity human. Just as the Amish looked at the electric light and saw a tether to a world that would eventually own them, a new breed of American is looking at the CBDC and the Starlink terminal and choosing to unplug. The analog city, an imminent reality. The analog city is no longer a dream of the past. It is an imminent necessity. We are witnessing the birth of sovereign enclaves, geographically isolated zones, particularly in the deep timber of the Upper Peninsula and the rugged, driftless area of Wisconsin. These are not prepper camps. They are sophisticated, high-functioning societies built on legacy technology. The manual economy, replacing the Ripple network with physical specie, silver, gold, and labor-backed local scrip that cannot be expired or frozen by an AI auditor in Lansing. The mesh frontier, utilizing shortwave radio and localized mesh networks that do not touch the orbital grappler web. Information is shared by hand, by print, and by voice. The mechanical guard. In these cities, the security is human. There are no microphones in the walls because there are no wires. The internal 38th parallel becomes a physical border where the digital citizen must leave their devices behind to enter. The North Korea mirror, the choice of the closed system. We look at North Korea as a tragedy of isolation, but the analog resistance looks at it as a blueprint for defensive sovereignty. North Korea survives because its systems are air-gapped from the global financial mesh. The new analog cities are building a closed improvement model. They are taking the technology of 1950 and 1980, the zenith of American mechanical independence, and perfecting it. Vacuum tube resiliency, using EMP-resistant electronics that the Nationalist Tech State cannot disable from orbit. Hydraulic governance, relying on physical machinery that requires human hands, not an algorithm, to operate. The sacred archive, physical libraries of paper and ink, immune to the digital book burning of AI-filtered search engines. The new land, division as deliverance. The division of America is not a disaster. It is a deliverance. The pencil line of the internal 38th parallel provides the space for a new land to emerge. While the cities of the managed zone become neon-lit cages of weed and watts, the analog cities will become the seed banks of human liberty. This is the new religion. It is the belief that a human being is a sovereign soul, not a data node to be harvested. It is the understanding that true high-tech is a garden that feeds you, a wood stove that warms you, and a neighbor who knows your face, not your facial recognition signature. The final call, the great unlinking. To the citizens of Menominee and Green Bay, the message is clear. The system is cannibalizing itself. You cannot fix the managed state by voting in a neutered council. You fix it by becoming unmanageable. The analog city is coming. It is built in the silence between the digital pings. It is built by the hands that refuse the $1 million voter bribe. It is the North Korea of liberty, a closed, improved, and sacred geography where the inside job cannot reach because there is no inside left to hack. The future is not digital. The future is analog. Thank you for listening to Zima by Wendy Coriel and Google, read by Atlas.